for being here today in whichever time zone. Thank you so much and greetings to you. This is Jenny Kwok from Hong Kong, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share with you one of my latest research topics and directions, where I'll be presenting a new workflow, which I call augmented reading, and proposing a new paradigm for doing digital humanities or interacting with our materials called AI hermeneutics. So it's been wonderful following the work of DARIAH-EU Friday Frontiers. And as part of the Autumn Series speakers, I hope we can continue the discussions and also exchange of ideas on how we can not only advance the usage of the tools, but also I am very excited to see how you imagine this can be transferred to your respective discipline as well. So just a little bit of overview of this presentation so you know what to expect. To begin with, I would like to share with you the context of this research project and the relevance of RAG for this project. And in the second part, you will hear a case study where I adopt the augmented reading workflow. And finally, I will be very quickly illustrating the idea of the AI hermeneutics and some of the limitations, as well as transferability of this paradigm, as well as workflow. So just a little bit of background in terms of research and also what I'm currently working on. I was spending my summer with Cambridge CDH. And also next year, I will be visiting fellow at Oxford University, working mostly at Bodleian and going through the archive for another project, which will also use RAG, but also graph RAG. Currently, research areas, I come from the literary studies. I have an Irish literature focus, but I'm also apparently doing digital humanities. I've recently been very interested in the usage of large language models and especially RAG applications in my research. And by extension, I'm also interested in AI ethics and democracy, which includes but are not limited to model distillation and also data colonialism related to the usage of LMs. Personally, some research projects and directions, this CANE project, where I use the RAG method, the retrieval-augmented generation, is one of my key research development. And also, I was very much interested in how computational methods and currently LM can enable us to bridge close and distant reading. So I revisited Josephine Miles' distant reading project as a close reading project. And also just mentioned data colonialism induced by LM development and its effect on indigenous communities. There is a paper currently being accepted by AI and society. And this is something related to today's topic because we're always very unsure of how to evaluate results, outputs by LMs and RAGs. So here's a special issue that we came up with during my visit to King's College London, and there's currently a call for paper on Journal of Open Humanities Data called Benchmarking for Digital Humanities. So I'm aware that the audience today comes from a variety of backgrounds. So in order to make this as approachable and also audience friendly as possible, I'm just going to pitch and position my research question in a broader manner. And then I will go into more detail as we look at the case study. So the research question that I'm asking here with my Irish literature troubles poetry reading is, can AI-driven archival retrieval methods illuminate subtle historical references and collective memory in conflict poems? So basically, can AI help us discover historical references that has been very subtly sprinkled across different poems? And also in reverse, can it or can it not, or to what extent, provide reinterpretations opportunities of existing reading of the poems? So here, the objectives are threefold. Number one, I'm trying to bridge the trauma theory with digital analysis so that we can interpret the conflict literature in a more holistic way. The second is in 2020, RAG method was first introduced by in Lewis et al.'s paper, and I would like to demonstrate how RAG has a capacity to provide relevant historical context for each poem that offers a new framework for literary reinterpretation. So how we can enhance existing scholarship rather than supersede it. And finally, to invite all of us in the community to rethink what does it mean to be a human, and what does humanistic hermeneutics mean in the age of AI? And also to propose that AI hermeneutics, as distinct from computational hermeneutics and also digital hermeneutics, as previously being proposed by different parties, especially for computational hermeneutics. There was just a new paper came up. There was a group paper published, preprint, released this August. So just to set the stage, I would like to argue that digital tools has always been an engine of epistemic change. Without getting into the details, we as DH scholars have seen how different digital tools have shaped our understanding of humanities and changed the ways we ask questions and do researches in different ways following the different development of tools. From punch cards to machine learning, we have seen how we are able to ask questions in a new way as well as finding new answers. So my argument here is the evolution of AI, which I argue there are three stages. The first one would be the Dartmouth conference, and the second wave will be the machine learning in the 1980s, the comeback, and the third wave will be the large language models. And digital tools have constantly reshaped how we ask and frame research questions. And each wave of technological innovation has catalyzed new scholarly practices and enabled new findings. So new tools have always prompted new modes of inquiry and revealing new patterns and conceptual possibilities. And a classic example is how we have moved from the close reading tradition and the focus on materiality to a large-scale reading, pattern-based, and also towards the study of digital corpus. But before moving on to my case study, I just want to lay the context of the current AI wave. By the current AI wave, I would be referring to starting from the 2015s to the present, the embedding and the multimodal models era. We saw the development of deep learning, the word-to-vector, vector search, and obviously now large language models. AI has become more autonomous, and to a sense that it's generative. It's as if it no longer needs anyone to control it anymore. And I've been asking myself, why has this wave of AI hit us especially hard as humanities scholars in various disciplines? It's not like digital humanities has not been controversial, but I think this wave of AI does hit us in a very ontological way. And my argument and my observations are threefold. Number one, large language models trigger a heightened anxiety towards computers, and AI in general. For example, we keep wondering how much is lost when we read the results, the black box, the notorious black box of large language models, and also how is it that we're going to stand as humanities scholars if machine interpretation is actually it's actually sufficient. Well, past tech has also shifted focus towards scale, for example, distant reading, movement, and topic modeling, stylistics. But large language models has really upped the game with contextual knowledge bound with scale. So now the contextual knowledge is actually enhancing the reading that's based on scale. And finally, building on the previous point, I'd like to argue that this wave of AI hit us especially hard because it's becoming more autonomous and generative. It's generative in a way that it suggests it can do human-level nuanced analysis. And I would like to argue that the threat here lies precisely in the nuance that programs like GPT seem to promise. And I would like to argue that it mimics nuance. It's not real nuance. And for anyone who is not familiar enough with large language models, which a lot of us are not because these information and technology keeps developing on a daily basis, it gives us a false impression that we have been replaced precisely because it mimics nuance. So here I would like to propose a new paradigm to augmented close reading with distant reading capacities. Since the current AI wave threatens to rob humanities scholars of our hermeneutic foundation and agencies, my proposed new paradigm called AI hermeneutics is based on a Gadamerian hermeneutics. It argues that there's a hermeneutic circle. We are informed by the AI findings, and then we interpret the text, and that interpretation goes back to feed the AI hermeneutics. There's also a historicity of understanding. We look at how AI has interpreted the text, the context, and then we develop our knowledge, and that will in turn shape our understanding of the text as well. And finally, fusions of horizons. We together work with AI as partners in the whole act of interpreting text. This is different from digital hermeneutics that has been proposed around 10 years ago, arguing how the choice and usage of digital tools is itself a hermeneutic. It's also different from the recently proposed computational hermeneutics, where it says framework for evaluating Gen AI hermeneutics is the next big thing. So here my focus is really not on how computers work per se, but how we as human, our understanding and our way of interacting with the text has been shaped and changed by AI integration. So my proposed AI hermeneutics has three centers. It's human-centered, it's reading-centered, and there is human expert interpretation involved. It's interpretation and scholarship-centered. The whole point here is not to displace human and also to keep the close reading focus and tradition. And most importantly, existing scholarship in the humanities will not become obsolete because we're in conversation with them. So I'm sure that it was enough theory for a DARIAH session. So I'm going to dive into how exactly under this AI hermeneutics paradigm are we doing augmented, what I call augmented reading in my Travels Poetry project. So this new way of reading text, which I call augmented reading, has LLMs participate in the meaning making level. It also interprets the text based on our intention and algorithmic logic, how we design the whole workflow. So it shifts the reading from a linear manner to relational, contextual, and multidimensional. We're going to see more of that in a minute. But basically, this whole augmented reading method is shifting our focus from a primary text-driven focus. We read the primary text and then we actively use large language models or other digital tools to analyze it for them. We let the context to take lead this time. We dive into the context and then we look back onto our primary text and then we ask, what extra information is the context showing us? So the case study is based on a specific period in the Northern Ireland called the Troubles during the 1969 and with a symbolic closure in 1998. There was a 3-decade conflict between two parties, so to speak. But before that, this project is based on trauma theory. I'd like to build a more holistic trauma continuum because the traumatized people, they often carry an impossible history within them, something that they cannot entirely possess. And with poetry, with literary creation, it's a mean, it's a conduit through which these traumatized people find expression of the trauma. But this expression of trauma is very often highly selected, and also it's dominated by a set of more well-known events, which I also call the literary historiography singularity. Literary historiography refers to ways literary texts are embedded within and respond to historical events, contexts, and discourses. So if we are only able to focus on a selected few representative events during a long trauma and conflict period, that will be there will be a reductive threat to our whole understanding of the trauma narrative. And by that, our cultural understanding of the whole period will be further reduced. So as mentioned, the Troubles was a 3-decade conflict, namely between the pro-UK Unionists, the Irish, Northern Irish, who believed they belonged to the UK and would like to be taken as part of it, and also the pro-Ireland IRA people, or the nationalists, who believe that they are born Irish and they should be reclaimed by Ireland. Now, however, the situation is so much more complicated than that because this is not just a political difference. There is also a religious and also social class difference there. Just to show you the modern relevance, this is currently what we call the peace tour map. You can still take this tour nowadays in Belfast. The red lines there, called the major peace lines, are the blocks where the Catholic areas are separated from the Protestant areas. And sectarianism was so bad back then and even now that as long as you tell people where you live and which school you go to, they will immediately deduce your political and religious inclinations. So what does rag have to do with the whole reading of the Troubles poem? So the period of Troubles poem, just like a lot of literary studies, and I'm sure in other disciplines in humanities as well, context is key. Without context, it's difficult to understand fully the message that has been conveyed in different written works. But context in the Troubles background is actually very hard to find as well as define. Here I'm showing a map, a timeline, which shows the beginning, all of the political parties that has ever existed from the beginning of Northern Ireland. So the top indicates the Northern Ireland, the beginning of Northern Ireland. We see on the far left, the nationalists, and then the others in the center, and the unionists. The red line that I drew indicates that the year when the trouble started. Because this conflict is imbued by political, religious, social class differences, people came into these parties with different agendas. So the result is there has been a lot of different transient paramilitaries that were born, even though short-lived, they have been very influential, and different parties emerge into each other. So as you can see, the more or less simple nationalist unionist dichotomy split into multiple small parties. And with this, it's almost impossible to trace clearly which poem was inspired by nationalist thinking, which poem was inspired by unionist thinking. And to make it worse, the Troubles was a period marked by multiple small-scale but daily attacks in Belfast, particularly, but also all over Ireland. So with all of these events sprinkled across the whole period, it's almost impossible for us to make sense of the poem's specific reference to events. And as a result, the reading of the Troubles poems has always been oriented around specific events like the Bloody Friday, Bloody Sunday, and Enniskillen and bombing. But in fact, the Troubles period is so much richer than that. And that speaks into the trauma theory because by only focusing on a few key historical events, we are effectively reducing the whole trauma narrative. And we are effectively reducing the cultural depth and the multiplicity of the whole narrative. Just to showcase how context is important in the reading of the Troubles poems for the purpose of this presentation. Now, this poem was written by Karen Carson called Belfast Confetti. There was different metaphors referring to punctuations and you can kind of feel it's about the riots on the road. So as you read the title Belfast Confetti, at first glance, it may suggest a kind of sarcasm there. Confetti, something joyous, but used in this context, it is probably suggesting something that's not as welcoming. However, this will likely be the imagery that we first have in our minds, Belfast confetti. However, with the right context, Belfast confetti actually itself would mean the homemade bombs, especially during the Troubles. This is a slang during the Troubles. Without this information, the reading of the poem Belfast Confetti will be based on an intuitive, but in fact, contextually wrong understanding of the word Belfast Confetti. So the paradox of dealing with context is you do not know you do not have the context until you come across the context that you previously missed. And this is where RAG becomes extremely helpful. We ran the poem into the RAG system that was built, and the first result, based on semantic similarity, shows us immediately it's directly related to one of the bombing events. So based on our previous discussion of how context is important for us in interpreting the text correctly, there are certain requirements when we're designing this project. There are several requirements for workflow with AI integration that we're specifically conscious of. Number one, would like the program to be able to discover pattern and contextual information on a broader scale, which a lot of the latest technology does. But of course, we know like large language models, they tend to hallucinate very seriously. The second is we are expecting accuracy even on expanded search. And number three, we want to guarantee minimal hallucination based on the accuracy demand. We also want it to be traceable and targeted. One thing that we felt existing DH tools or digital tools that is not exactly satisfying us is the detail is very often buried by the big corpus. And increasingly this has been taken as a norm. This is a devil that we learn to live with. But our team believe that with large language models, with the computer power that comes with it, is it not also possible that we can enhance our close reading precisely because now computers can go through the text in much more detail and with much higher efficiency than human alone did? Transparency. We understand if we are to work with large language models, which has very impressive contextual knowledge, we will need to deal with the black box mechanism. And with that, we're trying to introduce transparency as much as possible. And this is where RAG became very handy for us. RAG is short for retrieval-augmented generation. Retrieval refers to the process where the computer or the whole pipeline, they will retrieve information from a curated set of documents. Augmented meaning the generated results will be enhanced based on the curated corpus. And finally, generation refers to the part where the large language model is integrated. So the findings will be generated and output in a form that's human reader friendly. So just a very quick overview of how the RAG pipeline can be built. There's a lot of cookbooks online. You simply need to customize it according to your own needs, the scale of your corpus, and also the complexity of what kinds of information are you trying to retrieve. So first of all, the RAG pipeline is actually triggered by a prompt plus query. So it's triggered by you as a user asking a question. Now, once the system receives the query, it will trigger the next step called search relevant information. The searching of the relevant information will first be directed to what we call the knowledge sources. The knowledge sources referring to the set of documents, PDFs, CSVs, whatever documents that you want the LM to go through. So you build a controlled set of documents, you embed it, so it's encoded for computer readiness. all of these are stored in the knowledge sources. So that means you have complete control on how you want to mark these data and how you want to present them to the computer. Now, once the system retrieve the vector embedded information from the knowledge sources, it will be fed back into the center retrieval pre-relevant information retrieval process. And once it goes back to the system, it will then be integrated into an LLM system where the text response after incorporating the knowledge sources will be generated. And that's where we get a human reader-friendly response. So for our purpose, we do not want to over-rely on large language models for multiple reasons. So we only kept to the retrieval-augmented part, but that alone for us was rewarding enough. So just a quick note, going through some of the advantages of RAG. And also just a quick update, there has actually been a lot of recent advancements and developments in ways you can do RAG. And the way we're doing it currently is one of the earliest ways of doing RAG. We stuck to it because the accuracy and also the traceability from our respect is currently the highest. But there are multiple ways to do RAG. So back to the advantages, one of the most telling advantages would be accuracy. You have control over a curated set of data sets. So the large language model will only look at that data set when it's trying to retrieve the information. Currency, unlike large language models where you need to retrain the whole model if you want to add new information, you can simply update the documents that you've curated and you can easily update it in real time. Transparency. Based on how you chunk the text, the parts that's generated and retrieved is actually traceable. The RAG system gives you a stamp and tells you where exactly did they find this information. And last but not least, compared to traditional keyword search, it has expanded search power and with contextual awareness. And this power comes from the semantic-based search mechanism of RAG. So this is just a quick illustration of how semantic similarity works. The reason why a lot of archives, in our team's opinion, has been underutilized is because the keyword search function is not really serving us. We very often need to find the exact keyword to find the exact information. But really, a lot of gems lie around in the form of words or keywords that take similar forms, but we do not yet know the keyword existed yet. So as a result, we miss out on those keywords. But with RAG, we're able to retrieve information even if just semantically relevant. So just a quick example, if we're interested in learning about Obama, we may just ended up having his biographical information if we do keyword search. But if it can be expanded to including, say, president, then it immediately shows us a different paradigm and also different sets of information that is nonetheless related to the original search keyword. So this is the overall idea of incorporating the Kane archive into the reading of the Troubles poems. The Kane archive stands for Conflict Archive on the Internet. It is still currently run by Ulster University Belfast, founded in 1997, one of the most authoritative archives detailing the Troubles events online. One of the highlights of this archive is it's not only a group of key event summary, it's a mix of event summaries. It's a mix of reports, including interviews, literary work, influenced and inspired by the Troubles, reports, government, newspaper reports. So there's really a variety of information there, which, as you would have expected, like any other archives, the structure is heavily layered, making it very difficult to access and also making keyword search very, very difficult. So our method of working with the Kane archive is we first wanted to have a prototype to test whether this actually works. So we identified 10 poems from a set of 188 poems related to the Troubles, and we wanted to see whether any poems directly coincide with the year where a specific event happened in the Troubles, during the Troubles, that was especially mentioned and identified by Kane. So here, where there is an intersection means this year, when we know this poem was published, there was a directly related event there. So how do we exactly do the research? First of all, for this 10 poems, our key objective is to see in what sense can the reg empower and enhance and reinterpret our existing understanding. So the first thing we did is we identified the existing and known and agreed themes of these poems over here. And then we did a semantic similarity search using reg over here. So these are the few key events that Kane has identified, which is already beyond the usually discussed events in Irish literary studies. And after listing the top 5 searches, we match whether the themes that we have identified has also been identified by the search results. And we are particularly interested in these two. These two are very typically interpreted in a specific way. So one of them, we're using it as a test, as a kind of like a ground truth. The second one is one of the poems where, as we do a qualitative evaluation, we did find a new and possible reading. So for evaluation, and also to keep this presentation brief, for evaluation, we just want to make sure that reg can actually accurately retrieve the historical data. So this poem is very helpful by Seamus Dean, called After Gary 30, January 1972. The date itself is actually referring to Bloody Sunday, and this poem is in fact about the event Bloody Sunday, which is a famous event in the Troubles period. So in order to check whether reg can actually identify this event, we deliberately remove the title because the date alone would suggest the event itself. And interestingly, we did end up having the results here, Bloody Sunday. So although Kane itself is a very nicely kept archive with all of the metadata very nicely typed in, for some reason we did notice some of the events does not have a year specified in the back end data. But here we deliberately left that year not specified in because even without the specific date, reg, for some reason, still managed to identify the Bloody Sunday event residence in the poem that was specifically on the topic. And this is the integrated result that we get from integrating the findings with LMs. Just for your quick reference, and also just to show you why we're not proceeding with the LM at scale, because a lot of checking will go into the evaluation of the LM output. So just to very quickly show you the qualitative reading, how it has been shaped based on the contextual retrieved information that we've received. This is another very famous poem during the Troubles by Seamus Heaney, the 1995 Nobel laureate, called Whatever You Say, Say Nothing. Key scholars have almost always identified this poem as the epitome of Seamus Heaney expressing political oppression and political silencing during the Troubles. But from a reg result, we find something surprising that we're not expecting. Although the result 2 to 5 are all related to civil rights, which is something that we have expected, the result number 1 actually refers to a bombing event. So that invites us to go back and read the poem properly again and try not to be influenced by focusing on the political reading. And the result is quite rewarding. So this poem came in 4 parts, and as we go through the poem, trying to forget about the political nuances there, we did another close reading at part 4, and this is where we begin to see there has always been undertones of violence and bombings and daily casualty in this poem that has always been referred to as about political silencing. It's not only referring to the new camp for the internees, a direct reference to the hunger strikes. It also directly talks about a bomb in the roadside, daily and everyday violence. The scene has been compared to some film made of Stalag 17, a bedroom with no sound. And the despair is simply non-negligible. Is there a life before death? And the poet calls his people confidence with pain. So it's surprising how this almost very emotive stanza and also the concluding stanza has always been missed by scholars just because there is a kind of momentum gained by the whole political silencing narrative. So what RAG has proven to do with this quick example, there are several more examples, but for the purpose of today, we're going to stick to this qualitative evaluation. What this shows us is not only that it can enhance the reading through contextual retrieval. What's more encouraging is that it shows us it's possible to not break from existing scholarship, but rather to build on it, to enhance it, so that we are not only advancing on the DH direction, but we can find a way to go back and inform the humanities discipline per se as well. Apart from the close reading, the retrieved information also helped us to do the visualization, which was not previously possible. So the poems are in the blue dots and the red ones are the events. Here we begin to see the clusters, which events have inspired or at least semantically seem similar to different poems, which will help us identify which ones are exactly likely the more semantically and also narratively more influential events that will deserve more attention after this project. So just a quick visualized and interactive map to show you how we have identified different centers of the cluster that is different from what we have expected. For example, this bombing event compared to the more famous Bloody Sunday and Bloody Friday event has actually established more connection with poems than we have expected. And as someone who has been in the field, I rarely hear this event being talked about. And that also suggests to us how many events has been under-examined simply because we have been using keyword search, and that limits how much context we can actually assess and use it meaningfully to inform our reading. So that will also give us a new direction on how to imagine working and interacting with existing archives as well. So just a very quick word on literary and critical implications. This is an AI augmented close reading. It does not replace close reading. Rather, it gives us an alternative perspective to go back and reread based on AI augmented findings. It also helped us uncover hidden connections. It definitely involves human in the loop. It's not something that computers can do alone. So by AI hermeneutics, I'm really referring to a way where AI, or in our case, REG, will play a key role in helping us to form the contextual knowledge base. But human in the loop is nonetheless also necessary in the final shaping of the human hermeneutics and the meaning shaping. So this essentially challenges the popular notion that AI can and should only be used for distant reading. And here we're showing how it can actually enhance close reading in a way that was not previously possible with machine learning and topic modeling alone. So just some very quick words on the final section, challenges and transferability. The first challenge, or these are probably very common challenges to DH scholars in different disciplines. The first is obviously data reliance. We were really at the mercy of how many events were being documented by Kane Archive. So this is a quick look at the Wikipedia event summary. This is obviously less detailed, less expanded, but it covers a much wider range of events. But without having access to these events, our findings, the retrieve findings, will not be able to show these. The second is chunking methods, and this is quite specifically for RAG. We tried multiple ways of chunking the archival information, balancing efficiency and accuracy, choice of chunking methods. We have tried fixed size, chunking overlap, sentence splitting, semantic splitting, and that's when we realized when we work with RAG, when we're trying to teach the computer or the AI system to read and to interpret, there we open up a whole new realm of hermeneutics discussion and debate and semantics, etc. Because how do we mark the end of the meaning is precisely what will affect the outcome and the output of the RAG findings. Embedding quality, we currently are just using an open source embedding model, which is good enough, but it will obviously miss some discipline specific words and references. So in the long run, it will definitely be worthwhile and also necessary for us to develop something that will be more discipline or corpus specific embedding models. And once again, bias and perspectives affected by the chunking methods, as well as the embedding model. The third one is obviously again with the RAG output benchmarking. Although we did include an evaluation part in our at the beginning, the matching of the DARIAH poem was not the only one. We still struggle to find a very concrete and also foolproof way to benchmark RAG output. And this is only for our project. We're not even talking about the multiple different RAG applications and RAG possibilities yet. There is a possibility of over-retrieval. We did in fact catch a few instances where the system over-retrieved and they retrieved irrelevant events, even though it invites us to read the poem in a different light, and the findings turn out to be encouraging and also promising. Temporal projection is not something we've currently introduced. Currently, we would like to see the whole map of the drama narrative, so we just allow the chronology to go both ways. But imagine if this is used for a historical project, then temporal organization and also chronology will be important. Then how do we add in the temporal restriction in terms of retrieval of results will be another challenge. And once again, evaluation and benchmarking, what exactly should we look at? What might be the matrices? What are the benchmarks? How do we set the benchmarks? Is it project specific? Is it corpus specific? This is something that needs a lot more debate and discussion. That is also why we had that special issue coming out on benchmarking in digital humanities. And hopefully we'll have more discussions on how do we benchmark for large language models related methodologies, because we simply notice there is not enough discussion on how we should and could develop humanity-specific LM benchmarkings. Last but not least, ethical and practical concerns. This became very real when we were interacting with Kane, because we actually wrote to the director, who was very helpful, but he did mention not only the ethical use of AI, even though we mentioned that this is going to be all local, there was still a very grave concern regarding the integration of LM and how the information will be shared with, say, OpenAI. Also with privacy and copyright. Because an archive like Kane, it has different contributors. That will also mean that the copyright is spread across these contributors. So when we're asking for copyright, we were asking for permission to use the material, the response we received is they would love to give us a permission, but it's going to be a colossal work because so many parties will be involved in it. So how do we work with a data set that has multiple copyright holders. Finally, transparency and traceability. How do we know exactly what we're getting is what we want to get, what it claims to be? Of course, it was easy for us to trace back onto the data set, but what if we're doing this at scale? And we're not even talking about after the LM integration. So if you recall, we actually try to include that traceability into our LM output as well. We number the text chunks. So in the LM, they can always refer to the number of the text chunks. But how do we manage this when we're working on at a scale? And finally, infrastructure. Luckily for this prototype, we were able to work on open source data sets and also embedding models. But what about other projects, especially for some of the large language models that's much more powerful, but are nonetheless not open source? Privacy concerns, decentralization, and choosing a stable model. Without going into the full infrastructure and architecture of the RAG building, we actually ran into a lot of troubles with the model compatibility. One day the embedding model would work and the other day it wouldn't because it's undergone an upgrade, which we welcome, but it definitely messes with your whole original code that you have in your notebook. So final slide, transferability. I am quite hopeful regarding the whole paradigm and the whole workflow, but of course, if we are to be very serious, there will be a lot of things we can keep working on. In terms of AI hermeneutics as a paradigm, it definitely invites discussion on how different models interact with and inform human interpretation differently. It also redefines what context means because AI will now, based on semantic similarity, they will decide what context and relevant context might mean for us. Augmented reading as practice workflow, I definitely imagine this to go beyond literary studies because as humanities scholars, I think what brings us together is our attention to details. So that will allow us to move between large-scale retrieval and bring us back to close reading of materials. With retrieval-augmented mechanism there, I believe we can access the right context more easily and with more speed, and also with more accuracy that can go back and feed into our close reading practice. And that will also help us look into the studies that will involve digital or in general archival search. So just final words on the whole sharing. The whole workflow and the paradigm points toward the direction of computational plus traditional methods and also practices. It looks at trauma and memory. So there is an effort in connecting existing DH debates with existing humanities scholarship. In terms of future directions, there are multiple, but these are top of my list. Distilled model on national conflict trauma literature. So basically, distilled model for specific corpus. Benchmarking and evaluation frameworks for LLMs or RAG-related applications in the humanities. And finally, use cases that transfers augmented reading to other disciplines. And here are the references. Thank you so much for listening to my sharing, and I already saw some comments and questions coming up in the chat box, and I do look forward to a very exciting discussion session with you. Thank you so much, and thank you, Vicky and Ed.